Welcome back to the We See Monsters channel. I'm your host Jenna, and today I have a story about two brothers who set out on a trip to take some photography in nature, but wound up finding much more than they had bargained for. The whole situation wound up being pretty unfortunate for them, but I'll go ahead and jump into the story and let you guys find out for yourselves what exactly happened out there. Recently, my brother Zach has gotten really into nature photography. Last weekend, we decided to go camping so he could take some pictures. We live on the East Coast, so finding places far from cities is pretty hard. Luckily, Zach found what seemed like this perfect place on Google Maps. The map showed a wide open clearing right next to a road. It looked like a few hours' drive, but we decided to give it a shot. I packed up my gear and our dog Major. My brother loaded the car with his camera equipment, and we set off towards the spot. As we got close, I saw that the paved road had ended. An old "no trespassing" sign was hanging on a rusty gate. I could see a long dirt road curve out into the woods behind it. We didn't want to trespass, but we had driven so far. I asked Zach what he thought. He figured that the road and the land was probably just the property of some lumber company. It sounded about right to me. We noticed that the gate blocking the road wasn't even locked, and that sealed the deal. Zach jumped out and opened it for the car. After that, we found the spot without too much trouble. It was pretty much perfect, at least at first. We unloaded our firewood and pretty soon had a good blaze going in the middle of the clearing. Major was running around sniffing everything, looking like he was having the time of his life. Major was a pit bull. We'd had him in our family for almost 5 years. He was a great dog, if a little dumb. I loved that dog more than most people. He had helped me through a lot of tough times. Soon it was dark. We had read online that there would be thick cloud cover that night. The prediction was spot on. It seemed like the clouds were thick logs, just brushing over the tops of the trees. The only light for miles came from our little fire. I started making some dinners wrapped in tinfoil. Zach was holding his camera, taking pictures of an owl that was sitting in a tree in the distance. He dropped his camera, letting it hang from its neck strap. He looked at me and complained about feeling uneasy. I figured he was just being anxious and didn't put much thought into it while I put together the food. But suddenly, silence rang out through the trees. I realized that may not make much sense, but let me explain. If any of you have ever gone camping in the forest, you know there is almost constant sound of crickets, frogs, and the occasional owl. But it all just stopped in a split second. I stood up from my chair and looked into the woods. A distinct clicking sound came echoing into the clearing. Put your thumbnail behind your front tooth and pull until it makes a hard clack. It came in bursts. 3 clicks, silence. 5 clicks, silence. It sounded wrong somehow, like nails on a chalkboard or a fork screeching across a china plate. I can't explain it, but the click, mixed with the silence, made the hairs on my neck stand up. Major jumped up and stared towards the sound. I could see how tense he was. He began barking like mad. Major always has been an incredibly easygoing dog, but he was freaking out like nothing I had ever seen before. Before we could do anything, he bolted towards the sound. I jumped up and chased after him to the edge of the clearing, but he was too fast. He reached the tree line and disappeared into the darkness. I stopped at the edge of the clearing, breathing hard. Zach was close behind me, his camera bouncing on its strap. The clicking stopped, and the chirping of crickets rang out again through the woods. I stopped at the edge of the clearing and shouted after Major, but I heard nothing in response. Zach stood, staring into the woods uneasily. He asked me what I thought the clicking noise was. I told him that I had no idea. I pulled out my flashlight and told him we needed to go after Major. He looked less than happy but agreed. I turned back into the woods and started walking in the direction that Major had taken off. After just a few minutes of walking, the light of the small fire was completely blocked by the trees. The only light source that I could see was my flashlight. The woods seemed almost too dark. The thick clouds and remote location gave the woods an almost physical blackness. It reminded me of when I went caving a few years back. Zach and I kept on calling out to Major. After a few minutes, I heard a faint whimpering sound. I called for Zach to stop walking, and we listened. Zach nodded and whispered, "Yeah, that's Major, up ahead." We pushed on. Up in the distance, I saw a clearing in the trees. In the middle of it, I saw a huge concrete building. Decades-old graffiti covered the sides. It looked completely out of place in the middle of the woods. I pointed my flashlight at the ground around us. Neither me nor my brother could see any roads that led up to the building. Zach lifted his camera and took a picture. The flash lit up the clearing like a strike of lightning. While we stood there, I thought I heard the sounds of Major whimpering. They sounded like they were from inside the building. I started walking towards the building, and Zach called out, "Hang on, man. Let's think about this for a second." I got pretty mad. I wanted to go get my dog, who was scared and alone in this creepy building. I told Zach he was being ridiculous, especially if he was scared of some clicking sound. He whispered back to me, "All I'm saying is let's be careful, all right? No sense running in and cutting a leg open on a rusty piece of metal." I wish I'd had the sense to listen to him. We walked towards the building. A heavy metal door hung from its hinges in the front of the building. I walked through the doorway and started calling out to Major again. I heard Zach step through the door behind me as I made my way deeper into the structure. The floor and walls of the hallway were all made of rough concrete. I saw graffiti that must have been decades old covering the walls. The end of the hallway turned to the right. As I made the turn, I saw a pool of something discolored on the ground. The heavy stench of decay hit me like a wave. My flashlight flickered and went out. I stood in the darkness, clicking the button, but nothing happened. I figured the batteries had to have run out. I unscrewed the battery cap, switched the position of the batteries, and put it back on. The flashlight flicked on, but the light was faint. It spilled over what was clearly a several-day-old deer carcass lying on the ground. Its head was nowhere to be seen. Zach started retching and coughing into his sleeve. "Do you think a bear lives here or something?" he said between coughs. My flashlight died again. The darkness was absolute. The stench filling my nostrils made it hard to breathe. I called out again to Major. I heard Zach fiddling with his camera. He moved it in front of me. The camera flashed, lighting up the hallway for a split second. "It'll help some, but not much," he said. "Maybe we should go back for some more lights." I shook my head, even though it was pointless in the dark. Who knows where Major will have run off to by the time we go back? I heard a yelp of fear and pain from up in the distance. I told him to just keep taking pictures. We kept walking down the hallway, careful to step around the deer. Every 3 seconds or so, Zach took a picture, lighting up the hallway and the rooms on either side that we passed. Some rooms had pools of fluids spilling into the hallways. Zach stopped suddenly and I ran into his back. "What is it?" I asked. He didn't respond, staring at his camera's display. "What is that?" he whispered under his breath. Then I heard it. A noise echoed down the hallway. Click, 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 click. Getting louder. I felt numb. I stared into the blackness, not able to see anything. Zach took another picture, and light flashed out. I saw it, whatever it was. It almost looked like a human, but deathly white, pale, and naked. It had unnaturally long arms with claws that extended at least a foot from each finger. I saw something brown all over its chin and chest. I think it must have been dried blood, and it was on all fours, staring at us. I shouted for Zach to run. I grabbed his shoulder, and we sprinted back down to the hallway, the way we had come. I saw one more flash from Zach's camera just in time to step around the deer's body. We ran out of the building and into the woods. I don't know how we made it through the woods and back to the fire, but once we did, we didn't even pause to pack up our things. We jumped into the car and drove out of there. All of this happened yesterday. I can't stop thinking about Major. We left him there, with whatever that thing was. Every time I think about it, my hands shake. Still, I can't stand the thought of Major out there alone. We're going to have to go back. We'll bring some weapons and more lights, and I hope that's enough. I'd call the police, but what would I say? We were trespassing. No, it has to be us to take care of it. Be sure to click the links below to check out my TikTok and listen to the We See Monsters podcast, and hit the subscribe button for more spooky content.